What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday morning edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, where obviously every single week we talk about fantasy football. We preview the fantasy football week to come. We do some real or fake. We talk about some uncut gems. We preview some games. And there's only one person to do that with, only one person I would ever want to do that with. And that is the one, the only Rich Hribar. How you doing, my friend?
Doing good, man. We're closing down another month here, week 8. It's pretty crazy. It's crazy. We keep moving, man, and things keep ever changing, right? Like things that were true the first month definitely weren't true the second month, and hopefully just enough people have enough bodies left at this point to fill out lineups.
Yeah, I know. Like I'm having to I talk from a position of privilege here because some of the injury, obviously I've got hit by some injuries. It is
Yeah.
what it is. You and I are in a league together where I've just been decimated by injuries. Still have Christian McCaffrey on that IR spot though, keeping those fingers
Coming
crossed.
back, baby.
He's going to return and save my 1-6 season. So I'm hoping that that's going to happen. But yeah, like this has been a wild, absolutely wild year for injuries. Luckily, I've mostly dodged it, but I'm sure it's coming again. And then last week, I mean, the bad days were back again. In fact, like the offenses were back to being bad. It was as bad as it's been since week 1. Obviously, we lost Jaden Daniels one drive into that game, which killed us. We talked so much about how much we liked that Panthers Commanders game on the episode last week, and then it was immediately dead. Like that was immediately the end of it. And so it's just, yeah.
This Commanders
It's been
defense
tough.
making this surge this past month is definitely
No
not
bueno.
not warranted.
No.
I don't appreciate this.
No, I'm not a fan.
Come on,
Dan
Dan
Quinn, if you could
Quinn.
be
What
worse
are
at
you
your
doing?
job, that would be fantastic if you could be worse at your job. But obviously this week we got a trade with DeAndre Hopkins
Mhm.
going to the Chiefs, which, we're taking him out of a situation that you even tried to convince yourself. I felt like you were trying to convince yourself at Hopkins a couple weeks ago. We were finally going to get it from Hopkins. It was going to be there because, and it just wasn't, because that Titans offense with whoever's at quarterback's not working. Now we have him going to Kansas City. It's not like the Kansas City passing game's been anything to write home about either. In fact, before this Hopkins trade, when we were talking about on the Monday podcast with Tucker, who am I looking to pick up from, the rest of the receivers? My answer was none of them, because what are we really chasing with this passing game, right? What are we chasing here? I'm not sure what we are, but getting someone like Hopkins in here who can, absorb some of those targets, get them to maybe use Xavier Worthy more how they were using him before, take a little bit off of Travis Kelce so they can keep him fresh. This makes a lot of sense for that offense. I don't know how much it makes sense for fantasy, but ultimately this has to be a good thing for Hopkins, right?
I mean, you have to at least be optimistic. Like you said, just getting out of Tennessee, and then the opportunity is going to have to play with the best quarterback since early career, Deshaun Watson, right? That he's played with.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the past 3 seasons, he's the quarterbacks that have thrown passes, DeAndre Hopkins. Will Levis, 89 targets. Ryan Tannehill, 64. Colt McCoy, 43. Kyler Murray, 38. Trace McSorley, 15. And then Mason Rudolph, the latest, only 3 targets. Like, it's a definite upgrade. Obviously, it's a 32-year-old version of Hopkins. We don't know what he's been working through. He had that preseason knee injury, so we can't count on him just being like, the old DeAndre Hopkins for sure. But we've already seen the Chiefs resurrect a few ghosts of fantasy pass, so like what's to say like he can't be a viable player, right? Like I think I'm at least
Three
holding
weeks
that open.
ago, 3 weeks ago, they did it for Juju. Like we were excited about what happened with Juju Smith-Schuster. Literally 3 weeks ago, they resurrected a ghost of dynasty rosters past.
The
So
Kareem Hunt is back in our hearts. Like
yeah,
it's like there's a
there you
lot.
go.
So I'm at least holding it open. And does this help Patrick Mahomes, right? Like there's a lot of gamers that have, did not cut Patrick Mahomes. They're just grinning their teeth and bearing it to this point, and they're sticking him in their lineup and they're hoping for a spike week. Does this now give Patrick Mahomes an added out? Like to be like maybe a back end QB1 or have some spike weeks for us, because this Chiefs offense running through Xavier Worthy, like out of the bye, it's just a struggle. Like Xavier Worthy, and he had some of these issues in Texas. Like he is a really fast dude. We know that, but he didn't win downfield in college, and he didn't win with a lot of route nuance at Texas. And he was one of actually the worst downfield wide receivers in this class. Because if you put hands on him, I mean, the dude's a feather. Like he like the second interception Mahomes threw on Sunday, he just got ragdolled at the line of scrimmage. Mahomes thought he was going to be in a spot, and it turns out he's laying on the ground. So this gives him a chance to kind of be more of like like how they're using the beginning of the season, like you said, like vertical routes, jet sweeps, get him manufactured touches, because you can't run your passing game through him. And we've already seen now for 2 years, like you can't run it through the 35-year-old version of Travis Kelce. He can be a really solid ancillary piece, but it's not the same Travis Kelce that we had during those peak years. So you just got to be optimistic, right? Like I think it's a move with a lot of pros on all sides, except for the Titans side, because I mean, what are we gonna do?
Yeah. And then Calvin Ridley missed Wednesday's practice, so we don't even. Is it Tyler Boyd season?
Pick up the Lions defense.
Traylon Burks is on IR, so even none of those best ball hope and prayer last round picks that I made of him are going to work out even. So yeah, here we are. Fun times. All right. Like I said, we got a lot to talk about today. I do want to stop though and say, if you have never read one of Rich Hribar's worksheet previews, I recommend you go over to the site. We're recording this on Thursday morning at 11:30 Eastern, as we do every single Thursday. Come and join us on YouTube. Subscribe to the Sharp Football Analysis YouTube channel, and it will notify you whenever we go live. Warren Sharp goes live twice a week as well, at least twice a week. So make sure you're doing that. But we're recording this on Thursday morning. If you're listening to this live, listening before the Thursday night game, the Thursday night worksheet is free. The worksheet for the Vikings at the Rams. So you can go and read that worksheet preview. It's a great example of what Rich does every single week. He previews every single player, every single fantasy relevant player, and every single game every week. It's a ton of work. It's a labor of love, I would say, that he does every week. They're all out by Wednesday, late afternoon, evening. So all of the information you need to get ready for the week is out early. That's part of our fantasy package, which you can head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Use promo code that I was thinking about was should I trade Adams and White for Devin A-Chain? And that kind of feeds into, we can answer that question for sure. That feeds into kind of my first question about, like, we're getting Tua back. It seems like are we back in on this Dolphins offense? Like what are we thinking about this offense? First of all, on that question, I would say probably yes. I don't know where you are with that question, but more of like an overall idea. Are we back in on this Dolphins offense?
I mean, over what we had, yeah, they're the worst offense in the NFL. They literally have the worst touchdown rate per drive, the lowest points per drive. It can only go up. Like it can't get lower. Like Tua can't make it worse. But if you look at kind of the history since Mike McDaniel's been there, and it is kind of odd. Like Mike McDaniel's this guy, like we feel like he gets it. And for him to come out of the bye and like only get 4 targets combined to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill against the Colts was, I mean, that's definitely not a feather in the cap of Mike McDaniel. But since Mike McDaniel's been there, the difference between Tua on the field and Tua off the field is literally from dead last in the NFL in yards per play to number 1 in the NFL in yards per play. Like there's no delta. There's been no in between with Tua on or off the field. And it's wild because like Tua is someone that we don't really consider like an elite quarterback, right? Like you can say like he's a system quarterback, but he's been proven to be the system. So it's definitely a pro here. Tyreek Hill has been to this point one of the worst first round picks because a lot of gamers have probably just been throwing him out there, and you're getting like he's been 1 week where he's been higher than wide receiver 50 without Tua. And so you're putting these guys into your lineups, right? And you're not getting production. Achane has died since Tua's been out. Like all these guys have just been zeros. And now at least puts them at least into the like an area of credibility to where we can suck something out here and hopefully get some ceiling back. And it's a great spot for them this weekend. I mean, they're getting an Arizona defense we picked on all year, going cross country for an early kickoff on a short week. It does line up for the Dolphins to kind of like get this thing going right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I had some stats here. Cardinals are 29th in yards per play allowed, 29th in points per drive allowed, dead last in yards per pass attempt allowed. If you were trying to say, where is a spot that we're going to be excited about, Tua coming back, this would certainly be one that you would target. You mentioned Devin A-Chain and how he's kind of fallen off, but that's been passing production. The running game was not even working when Tua was there the first time, right? They were 27th in yards per carry on running back runs and dead last in the rate of negative runs over the first 2 weeks. And so we're obviously excited about A-Chain coming back. We're hopeful that receiving usage continues with him, with Tua back. And so, and then we'll see kind of what happens with the running game. We'll see what we can get out of Mostert and where we go from there. We have a much longer history of this running game being successful than, kind of what we saw the first 2 weeks. So I'm hopeful, but we'll see. And then, I mean, obviously with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, I mean, this is just manna from heaven with Tua coming back with them, because we were at the point where like you had to start Waddle, you could bench, you had to start Hill because of who he is and what he could do. But like now we're back to, okay, I'm finally excited to start Hill again. And like you mentioned, I believe in the worksheet when you wrote up this game, that we're very interested in Hill in DFS, I think, this week, because maybe you even get him for a little bit less on a fewer rosters than you maybe normally would.
Yeah, I mean, the field is definitely sharp now. I do think that those guys will be popular. It's a totally different week in DFS too than last week, where pricing was really tight last week. It's a lot more open. I don't know if it's because we have our first full slate again. There's no buys this week and there's no international games, so that helps some things. We had a lot of injuries too, so a lot of moving parts salary wise. I know you're not a big FanDuel player, but someone goofed on FanDuel, and although he hasn't been good to this point, but Dalton Kincaid's only 4K on FanDuel, which is like just an accident happened, because that's like cheaper than Brock Wright, like Stone Smart, like guys like that. So it's like there's just a lot of goofy things happening this week where it's a lot more open, and we're going to see like a lot more dispersed ownership this week. So it's going to be probably a fun week. I'm definitely looking forward to this slate.
So Friday is my DFS day. I have so much, for the site and everything that I do Monday through Thursday, that Friday I sit down and kind of work on DFS. And I have a Post-it note actually on my computer screen, very near to your face right now, that is simply to actually do FanDuel this week. Dig into FanDuel this week, because Richie tells me that is certainly the place to be.
We don't want to blow up our spot though, but yeah, it's been a little softer this year.
FanDuel's the place to be. There's actually an interesting point in here from Uncle Ted. Can't build a team around a lefty and expect a righty to step in and succeed. I do think there's probably some truth to that. This is not why I think there's some truth to that, but I just have to share this. I'm in an online dynasty for College Football 25, and I recruited a quarterback that I didn't realize was left-handed. And like every time I play with him, it's a nightmare. Like trying to run an offense for a right-handed quarterback with a left-handed quarterback was an absolute nightmare. So I'm with you, Uncle Ted. Obviously not. That's the
whole thing about this past month with the Dolphins is that this was foreseeable. Like it was preventable. Like this was a team that should have had a better backup quarterback situation entering the season.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's probably a very small part of it, but you just gave me PTSD from remembering trying to throw passes with that left hand.
I am left-handed, so I won't stand for this. Erasure.
I'm left-handed as well, except not in sports. I write left-handed. I eat left-handed. I'm left-footed in soccer, but anything that you had to have equipment for, I'm right-handed. And I think there's probably some socioeconomic issues at play for why that's the case. But we could talk about those later. All right, let's move on to another backup. Jameis Winston. I'm basically just talking about Jameis here, so you can emphatically talk about how this is not a Joe Flacco situation. So have fun. Take the floor.
No, I mean I think it could definitely be better though, right? This is another one where it's just like it's been so bad, it's hard to be worse. Like it's hard for the situation to be worse. I will say, if we were going to get Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I actually think that was going to be worse. Like Dorian Thompson-Robinson is a worse quarterback than this version of Deshaun Watson. Like,
do you want some numbers for that?
Yeah, I mean,
some numbers to back it up?
Dude, he's been miserable.
It's been
Go ahead,
so bad.
Drop him.
On 112 attempts last year, he had a 53.6% completion rate, 3.9 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. On 24 attempts on Sunday, he had a 45.8% completion rate, 3.4 yards per attempt, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. There are caveats there. He's younger. 2 of his 4 career starts have come when he didn't really even expect to start or expect to play a lot. I would say this last one wasn't a start. So there are caveats there. But when you eye test the situation, like it's not surprising. And to your point, if we were going to get him, I'm not sure if it was better, but getting Winston over Watson, even if he's not going to be Joe Flacco and what Joe Flacco did at the end of last season, like the bar we're trying to jump here is under the ground. So it's really hard to get worse from where we were with his offense.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen literally for 7 weeks, like multiple people like tweet the stats about the Browns, right? Like they have like one of the all-time worst offenses through 7 weeks of any NFL season. I mean, they're dead last in almost every offensive metric you can find. So just getting a functional quarterback and maybe getting some things on schedule, especially with the return of Nick Chubb, can hopefully, get this thing out of subterranean levels and at least to usable levels, right? Because they have pieces we want to be interested, right? Like Nick Chubb, David Njoku now with Amari Cooper being gone. Is Jerry Jeudy just going to be something gamers chase forever? But Cedric Tillman looked solid getting his extended run, for the first time last week. So there are some pieces here that can definitely still be interesting. Jameis Winston has not played well like over the past 3 years, anytime we've seen him. But like you said, just being better than this version of Deshaun Watson is such a low bar to clear. There's an opportunity for passing production always against the Ravens. Typically it comes in late in games, like especially the fourth quarter. Like fourth quarter versus the Ravens is probably the best quarterback in football right now. You can play in fantasy football. He's got to fight through 3 quarters to get there. But the fourth quarter production the Ravens are giving up is something we can definitely get behind for Jameis Winston. Like garbage time Jameis Winston, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The best quarterback in the league. Actually, yeah, if the Ravens are, as I would assume they're going to be, blowing out the Browns when we get into the fourth quarter, find whatever that Browns live line is and maybe just take a look at it, because the Ravens given up a ton of points in the fourth quarter, given up the most points in the fourth quarter this year, and it's not been particularly close. I'm glad you mentioned Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy. I did pick up Cedric Tillman several places this week. I had him in the waiver column. I mean, it would be irresponsible not to do that because of what we saw. What I will say is that Tillman was definitely the preferred target of Dorian Thompson-Robinson when he was in there. 7 of his targets came from Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Winston targeted Jerry Jeudy a ton. When he came in there, that's when Jerry Jeudy saw all of his work. And that'll be something interesting to track now that we know that Winston's going to be the starter. That'll be something that's interesting to track. And I do worry that if you're basing off of what we saw from Cedric Tillman last week and you're kind of expecting that to continue with him in that like kind of number 1 receiver role, I don't know if that's what we're going to see, but it's certainly something interesting to watch. And you mentioned Njoku. Njoku's going to get what?
He's the dude
25 to 30% of the targets. Like 30% target share is well within the realm of possibilities for David Njoku here. That's who you want, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we'll see Tillman and Jeudy probably oscillate. Maybe you get a random Elijah Moore game. Probably not. But Njoku's the focus point of this offense. And we've seen the past 2 weeks, he basically has 30% of the team targets the past 2 weeks. Tight end getting a little better, is it? Like obviously not for Sam Laporta, but like it feels like tight end is getting a little better as a whole. Like ranking dudes this week, I was like, oh, these guys are okay, and I haven't really felt that way.
Obviously, man, Sam Laporta just catching strays. My favorite thing I read from you this week was Sam Laporta. I don't know, guys. I don't know what to do with Sam Laporta, which is fair because who knows?
I don't know. And you hope that maybe with Jameson Williams being, kind of off the shelf for the next 2 weeks, it gets them kind of going with Sam Laporta again. But Jameson Williams only had 1 target last week, so
what are we doing? I don't know. Actually, Jay Smells asked a very important question. So you would both take the trade for A-Chain? You never answered his A-Chain question.
Yeah, I would make that trade.
One more trade in here that I do think is interesting: Garrett Wilson and Darnell Mooney for T. Higgins and Amari Cooper. If you're having the Higgins and Cooper side, that seems like a slam dunk to me. Are you kind of on that as well?
Yeah,
Wilson and Mooney.
Yeah, I am as well. I mean, T. Higgins, like, who's been the brunt of like a lot of, like he's like gamers kind of always like don't like T. Higgins because he's had like the injury thing where he comes on the field and off the field, and he was more of a volatile producer. But I mean, this loss of Tyler Boyd in this offense and Yandre Oshevich not stepping up, like both like T. Higgins is getting like wide receiver 1 usage. Like they both are, him and Jamar. He's actually getting better usage than Jamar Chase. It's just Jamar Chase is a more explosive player. So I mean, T. Higgins looks to be like a rest of the season, like basically fringe wide receiver 1. Like, I mean, he's getting elite usage right now.
Yeah, I mean his target shares, now that, like you said, now that Boyd's gone, we haven't seen that other guy step up. You do worry about Higgins with his injury history, but just when he's on the field, the usage he's getting, and we're going to talk about that game, it might not seem that way because of kind of some of the stuff we've seen from the Bengals over the last few weeks, maybe not being pushed. We'll talk about that game and whether they will this week. But from like a pure rate perspective, you have to like what you've seen from a usage perspective for Higgins. Talking about that rate perspective, are we getting the woke Chargers? are the Chargers starting to pass? Are we getting
Mm-hmm.
the pass heavy Chargers? Over the first 4 weeks, the Chargers
I think we lost. Oh,
very fast
we
rate.
lost
I'm
you for a
back.
minute.
I was gone. I'll have to reset. But I do want to say 45% of Justin Herbert's attempts this season have come in the last 2 games. That's where we are right now with this passing game. Like, what are we doing? Why is this happening, Rich?
Because they can't run the ball. Like even Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman like can only run for 2 yards at a time for so long, right? Like, and that's kind of what's happened. And your best player is Justin Herbert, but this running game has died kind of the past month. All the explosive, and maybe it was always fool's gold because there's the long runs that J.K. Dobbins had the first 2 weeks. But the past 4 games, he's got 68 carries for 212 yards. That's 3.1 yards per carry. He hasn't rushed for more than 3.8 yards per carry in any of those 4 games. Still getting a huge workload. But this team's just been unsuccessful running the football, so they've had to kind of push the ball through the air more. And Justin Herbert has played really well. We'd like to see them still mix in more early down passes than they have over the span, but it's trending in the right direction. Back-to-back games with over 30 passes. If they were good in the red zone last week, Herbert could have had a really good fantasy night, but unfortunately, they all the points to the Cameron Dicker.
Yeah, it was tough scenes there. You mentioned the running game. I do wonder, like, how much longer are we going to see this J.K. Dobbins dominance? Because it has been dominance. He has 78% of the running back carries over the last 2 games, but just 3.5 yards per carry, 25.6 of his runs have been 0 negative runs. It's not like Kamani Vidal has been a ton better on his carries, but I do wonder, like, are we gonna continue to see that? The other thing about the passing game is that I was not interested in Ladd McConkey at all coming into the year because I just didn't think we were going to get the volume. If we're going to get more of a kind of like a normal volume passing game, then suddenly we'll have to see what happens, with his hip and all of that, obviously. But suddenly I am much more interested in Ladd McConkey if this is the kind of volume we're getting from this passing game.
Yeah, no issues there. I mean, all of his metrics are really good. It's just like from a routes run and volume perspective that's been kind of hindering him. He plays a lot in the slot too. He's not getting a lot of downfield targets, but absolutely, the biggest bugaboo for him is just more playing time, like getting more routes and having more dropbacks as a team. But yeah, I mean, this is interesting. It could be more of a summer parts. Like, I was really excited going into Monday night for McConkey in that matchup, and he got banged up. But then, I mean, dude, they're throwing like 12 targets to Will Dissly. Like,
Well, Disley season.
yeah.
You were talking about those tight ends, ranking those tight ends, and yeah, the bottom, like, it's just there's some interesting guys down there. Hunter Henry. Are we going to keep getting Jatavian Sanders? Are we going to keep getting that kind of usage? I mean, that feeds into our kind of next topic. Do we really care anymore? But like, what are we
Yeah.
gonna?
Well,
What are we
not at
gonna
least for
see?
1 week, we're gonna put all the Panthers guys back on the shelf, maybe longer.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I guess I kind of feed through this real or fake kind of prism when I'm talking about this stuff. And my headline here is Diontae Johnson is unstartable with Bryce Young, real or fake? And I think it's probably real, right? That's
Against the
kind of where we are.
Broncos too.
Yeah, it's real, right?
I am there. I mean, his first 2 weeks he was with Bryce Young, wide receiver 57, wide receiver 80, 42% of his targets were inaccurate throws, like an absurd number. Patrick Surtain's going to be back in this game. The Panthers have a 17-point team total. I didn't know if it dropped after the official Bryce Young news, but this is just not a spot where you trust this offense to be very good. And it honestly hasn't been good for the past month with Andy Dalton either. It's just that we're getting more targets facilitated that were catchable for Diontae Johnson. But even he's had a couple of volatile weeks with Andy Dalton as well. I did bring up a couple weeks ago. I thought he was a pretty clear sell. I still think he is, but you're not going to be able to sell him probably after last week's game and then Bryce Young starting. You're going to need to recoup some of that stuff. But because eventually I think we're going to just have to see Bryce Young, them just like do the Zach Wilson thing where they just like play him the rest of the season, and it's going to be gross and bad for everybody.
Yeah, I'm not excited about it. I'm in a dynasty. I have a dynasty team that's rebuilding. And someone had dropped Bryce Young, and I picked him up because who knows what's going to happen, right? Like, we see the oddest. This year is as great example as ever that quarterbacks can come back from the dead, right? And so we'll see what happens. But I'm not like predicting that that's what we're going to see. But I think you're right that what are we doing with Dalton with the Panthers? Like, you have to know with Young, maybe he needed some time off to get his head right. We'll have to see. To give a real world example here for Diontae Johnson, I have him in one league. I think I only have him in one kind of redraft managed weekly league.
He's a dude I was drafting.
I'm pretty comfortably starting Chase Brown over him this week, and I don't think you're probably pushing back on that, right?
No, I mean, I'm sitting playing a bunch of dudes over him basically in all my leagues. I think there's a couple spots where I kind of have to play him this week, but where I have options and like the wide receiver 3, like plus line, like I'm just playing those guys over him. It's not a good, and like I said, it's not even the whole Bryce Young thing too. It's going against this Broncos team. The highest scoring week the Broncos have allowed to a wide receiver was Tyler Lockett in week 1. He was the wide receiver 22 that week. They've allowed just one other top 40 scoring week to a wide receiver. That was Jacoby Myers. So like, what's the ceiling even? Like, what am I missing out on is what I feel like.
And Patrick Surtain's going to be back this week. So yeah, there's not really much to get excited about here for Johnson.
And
All right,
it's
let's get
bad
into
for
the
Chuba
games.
Hubbard too. And like, I know a lot of
Yeah.
gamers just have to throw Chuba Hubbard out there, as a volume-based RB2. But this is a spot where I think he gets hurt too as well in this game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, that's troubling. It's upsetting because we've seen Chuba Hubbard actually be very useful from a fantasy perspective, even if maybe the Panthers offense hasn't been, great in the last kind of couple weeks. And so yeah, just
And it's probably our
upsetting
last
all
week
around.
without Jonathan Brooks.
Yep. We're getting so we get the Dolphins back, but we lose the Panthers. I guess that's a fair trade. I suppose that's a fair trade all around. All right, let's talk about a few of these games. Before we get to the game previews, though, I do want to remind you that every single game, every single week is previewed by Rich Hribar over at Sharp Football Analysis. We call them the worksheets. They are the best way to get ready for the fantasy football week. They're the best way to get ready for the betting week, especially if you like betting props. Ton of great information in there. Available at Sharp Football Analysis, 20% off using promo code ANGLES. And by the way, if you're listening to this, subscribe wherever you're listening to this. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate the support. All right, let's talk about the Eagles and Bengals. Bengals minus 2.5, 47.5 point total. I brainstormed an idea for this game called the She's All That game of the week on a call yesterday, that this game could be maybe a lot more exciting than it seems like people are giving it credit for. I'm sorry, kids, that I don't have a more recent pop culture reference for you. I'm a very old man, but we'll go with She's All That. And it seems like in general, the idea there is you're pretty excited about this game and maybe think this game is a lot sexier than maybe it's getting credit for.
Yeah, I think this game from a stacking perspective looks pretty juicy. And I've messed with a few lineups on both sites, and you can feasibly actually stack this game. Because the first thought when you have a game like this, it's like, well, everyone's really expensive, and they are expensive, but we have a lot of pay down options that are actually more viable than what people were doing last week with like Jordan Whittington and Juju Smith-Schuster, right? And like Jalen Coker. We actually have good players that are getting targets and playing time. And you look at both these teams, they both score a lot of touchdowns, which we love. 69% of the Eagles scoring plays this year have been touchdowns. It's the highest rate in the league. The Bengals are 5th at 67%. And both these defenses, I still believe, are susceptible. They've both kind of bounced back the past 2 weeks, but then they both have faced the same two teams, the Browns and the Giants, like two teams that really haven't been good offenses the whole year. Really, both those teams also have struggled to protect the passer against everybody. And we've seen like kind of the Eagles bounce back from a pass rushing perspective over that span. And I'm curious to see if that holds up here against the Bengals. I have my doubts. I do think the Bengals are going to be able to rush the passer in this game with the injury of Jordan Mailata and Trey Hendrickson, but I still think the Eagles are going to be set up in a spot to take some shots downfield against this secondary, against the Bengals that just really hasn't been tested the past 2 weeks. Because remember, even when they faced the Giants, Malik Neighbors didn't play in that game. And Slayton had a couple big plays called back in that game. So against A.J. Brown and against Devontae Smith, I think that there's going to be some plays to be had there, especially in a game with no Dallas Goedert. I think we're going to see Devontae Smith bounce back as well. He just kind of was lost in the sauce of these last 2 games. I mean, the Eagles have pass rates the past 2 weeks of 42% and 35%. Those are by far their lowest rates of the season. To open the year, they weren't below 50% any game. They had 2 games over 66%. They always are going to skew a little run heavy because of Jalen Hurts and obviously the addition to Saquon Barkley and how that offense runs. But I do think they're going to be forced to throw the football more in this game. And the Eagles also faced 2 teams the past 2 weeks in the Browns and Giants that play a lot of man coverage, which obviously facilitates targets to A.J. Brown. I mean, literally anytime A.J. Brown has had one-on-one coverage playing with Jalen Hurts, the rock is going to A.J. Brown. So I think we're going to see a reduction of that. I mean, A.J. Brown, as much as we all would love it, is not going to have a 35% target share in every game. And he has had that in all 3 games this year. You're not running away from it. I'm using all that to set up that I do think that Devontae Smith's going to have targets this week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doubtful that he's going to get negative yards again. That is my hot take. My hot take for this game. And I think your point is really important, is that, if you're looking at kind of usage for Smith over the last couple games, you also have to take into account the fact that they just haven't had to throw. And we're going to expect them to have to throw here. Your point about, these defenses might be like, I think about the Bengals run defense. Is it actually better, or have they just gotten a couple good games in a row? Because it was bad early in the season. They had players come back, obviously, so maybe it is better. But I'm not running away from Saquon Barkley. We still have that history of this exact Bengals defense being pretty bad against the run. I mean, you have the same question for the Eagles defense, really, their run defense as well. And so, if you're thinking about Chase Brown or Zach Moss and kind of the usage split there, which we kind of hinted at, we can talk about here in just a second. So, like, all of those things together, yeah, I am really into this game. I'm really into stacking it. Although, like, this idea that you have your finger on the pulse of kind of like fantasy Twitter and the DFS market more. I was surprised when you kind of wrote about, like, maybe we're not as excited about this game, because this, like, it has everything to me. I don't know why we wouldn't be excited about this game.
Yeah, I mean, just because anytime you usually have a game like this where the pieces are expensive, it's harder to stack. But this week is a little bit, like I said, it's just more open this week. And because there's no buy, and because there's no buys too. I mean, I think ownership's going to be largely flatter than it's been any week this season, especially at the running back position, because there's a lot of really good plays this week. So it's just going to smooth out. Like, I don't think we're going to come in with like a lot of really chalk like we've had, like the Bucky Irving week and things like that. Like, it's going to be a lot more dispersed this week.
What about that split in the Bengals backfield? You had some interesting kind of numbers on that in the worksheet.
I mean, he just keeps trending up for Chase Brown as the primary runner. Every game since week 2, he's had a larger percentage of the running back carries. The just last hurdle he needs to clear to, like, be in our hearts as like a locked in RB2 plus is just getting Zach Moss like relegated in these like long down and distance situations and as a pass protector, because the way Chase Brown is living right now, he's getting like he's not getting the safe, cozy floor touches to save him for weeks he hasn't had a touchdown. And that's been the one kind of like bugaboo for him, is you look at every week he hasn't had a touchdown. He really hasn't been that good for fantasy football and hasn't had a stable floor. So that's really all it is. It's just trying to get Zach Moss off of these like passing downs. Maybe we can get a couple dump offs and things like that. But it's been trending positively for Chase Brown ever since week 2.
Yes, and all the Chase Brown truthers say amen. We're waiting. It's coming. We have some best ball rosters that I could really use. Some second half of the season Chase Brown. So let's do that for sure. Let's move on to the Cowboys at the 49ers. 49ers -4, 45.5 point total. This game's on Sunday night. This is a fantasy podcast, so we don't really do the first takey, who needs this win more kind of topics. But I mean, buddy. Who needs this win more? This is one of those games that is just like, what happens if either of these teams lose this game? We're in full meltdown mode at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the 49ers are largely fine. The Cowboys, definitely, I have a lot more reservations about. I mean, I definitely think that the 49ers, with the amount of injuries they've had, is definitely an issue big picture. But I still think this is one of the better football teams in the NFL. They've had a couple of things kind of go awry. Like the Cowboys, I really don't feel that way. This is kind of how I thought the Cowboys would be coming into this year. Yep. So that's really kind of where I'm at. And listen, the Cowboys do not have a good history against this 49ers team and Kyle Shanahan, especially Dak Prescott. So it'll be interesting to see if they can come out and buck the trend. And the other thing you think about with the 49ers, like they're catching the 49ers in a soft spot potentially, especially if there's no Deebo Samuel available for this game. And the passing game just is down to George Kittle and like a bunch of pieces. But are the Cowboys going to be able to stop Jordan Mason in this game? That's like the question, because the 49ers can still run the football, then that's a problem for the Cowboys. But here nor there, we'll talk about the players.
No, I'm going to try to make you do a first takey topic
Yeah.
every single week. We'll see how far we get with that. Our friend Curtis Hirsch actually had Jordan Mason as a sit last week, and I agreed with him for lots of reasons. It worked out barely because he could have definitely gotten one of those touchdowns, but it worked out. But yeah, we're definitely going the other way with him this week. We're really excited about that. And I want to say I think I made a mistake with where I put Ricky Pearsall in the waiver column this week. Just owning up to it now, because I think I had him too low. I don't think I properly accounted for the possibility that Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings sit out this game. I think, and I believe you're in agreement with me, kind of based on what you put in the worksheet, that if Deebo Samuel and Juwan Jennings are healthy, those are the two receivers that we're interested in moving forward. But with the stuff we've now learned about Deebo and the illness that he was dealing with, pneumonia, his hospital stay, Juwan Jennings, sat out Wednesday's practice. There was some positive stuff about him early in the week, so maybe we do get Jennings back for this matchup. But like with everything that's going on, I mean, we could get that Ricky Pearsall wide receiver one kind of usage, and that's without even considering Kittle's injury situation. With what we know about Kittle, I'm going to assume that he plays through it. But like this injury situation at wide receiver is tough.
Yeah, and you have to think about too, like while Jennings has been awesome anytime he's played this year, if he misses this game and Pearsall plays good, just is the door open, right? That's the thing. Like now the door opens and it gets a little bit more muddy. I do believe big picture though, the two guys that benefit the most are still just Deebo and Kittle. Especially because we're anticipating maybe Christian McCaffrey plays again. Like it feels like we haven't had negative Christian McCaffrey news for a while, but hey, he's not back on the field yet, so we'll believe it when we see it. But obviously we've talked a lot about the splits over the last couple of years when Brandon Ayuk's off the field, just how insane Deebo's numbers are. And he has run 199 routes. Like this isn't like a Mickey Mouse sample here, like 200 routes. Since the 49ers have drafted Brandon Ayuk with Ayuk off the field, he's been targeted on 36% of those routes with 4.6 yards per route run. 4.6, like absolute, just like stupid number. Like for some context, like that, like for a season, like low threes is like typically the leader, and it's like 1 to 2 guys. So even if he sheds some of that, like it's going to be an absolutely good run out for Deebo Samuel when he can be healthy and get on the field. And then George Kittle obviously has enjoyed anytime one of the 49ers has been off the field. And we talked a little bit about the Boyd situation elevating Higgins this season. The Christian McCaffrey being gone and those targets really having nowhere to go went to Kittle this to open the year, and it's elevated Kittle. And now he's going to have this run out where Brandon Ayuk doesn't play. So I do think big picture, Deebo and Kittle get the largest bumps, and we're probably going to have a battle now, and it depends on Ricky Pearsall's performance. I think we're trending towards Jennings not playing Sunday. He was a DNP for the 4th practice in a row to open this week. He's got a hip injury. So if Pearsall plays well, do we see kind of like a battle then between those guys? Because remember, the wide receiver 3 in this offense doesn't play. This is a team that doesn't play a lot of 11 personnel. It's been the thing while Jennings has had awesome peripherals. Since Ayuk came back or Deebo came back, Deebo's one that missed the game. And it's made Jennings just kind of like a volatile play. Like he still has good metrics when he runs routes, but like he doesn't get targets and routes because they don't play a lot of 11 personnel. So whoever loses that battle, I assume it will be Pearsall, but it could be, Jennings if Pearsall plays well or he's just not healthy. That player is probably just not going to be he's going to be probably a roster clogger, to be honest.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was lower on Pearsall, maybe even than consensus early this week in kind of the waiver, is because I don't really want anything to do with that number 3 wide receiver, whoever that ends up being, especially if we are getting Christian McCaffrey back after the bye, which, like you said, it seems like we're at least, trending that direction. And I actually had an interesting conversation with somebody on Twitter about, okay, well, why would it be Jennings over Pearsall? They invested a lot in Pearsall, which is, fair. And if you want to bet on youth and upside, I'm not going to ever push back on you on that. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing in the Tampa Bay situation, is just bet on youth and upside. But I mean, they also made a big investment in Juwan Jennings. They could have had him for $5 million this year, and they decided instead to give him a longer contract. We've seen, like you said, all of his peripherals when he's played this year have been good. But ultimately, if he's hurt and he just doesn't play this week, and Pearsall goes out there and goes wild, like what are you going to do if your highly drafted rookie goes wild when you give him the opportunity? It's kind of hard to put that cat back in the bag. And so yeah, that's kind of the situation we are. So
also, if there's one dude that doesn't stock draft capital, it's Kyle Shanahan. man. Like from the evidence
That's
we've
fair.
seen, like over
That is fair. Yes,
the.
yes, that is 100% fair. I'm hopeful Jennings plays this week, but I'm kind of with you. I was a lot more confident that was going to happen on Monday, Tuesday than I
And
certainly
don't forget,
am
like
right
dudes
now.
like Chris Conley and Ronnie Bell are gonna play too. Jacob Cowing, like,
We have
yeah.
to see more Jacob Counting, right? Like I know he had that one long play, but he ran what, like 8 routes in that game or something like that.
Mhm.
If Jennings is out, we have to see more Cowing. Please, let's see more Cowing. The other thing is, I'm not saying that Dallas has great options at running back, but can we please end the Ezekiel Elliott thing? I know that they've like tried to give him more run after he complained, and I understand that he's a Cowboys legend. I understand there are issues in the locker room and all of that, but please, can we just give the ball to Rico Dowdle? Elliott has 0 10-yard runs this season. He has gained 5 or more yards on just 23.7% of his runs, which is 64th out of 70 qualified running backs. Rico Dowdle is 4th among that group in percentage of 5-yard runs. So we're not talking about an incremental difference in that metric. We're talking about literally the bottom of the list versus the top of the list. I'm not saying Rico Dowdle's the second coming of Barry Sanders or anything, but please let's just play Rico Dowdle. Can we do that? That is my plea to the Cowboys offensive coaching staff. All right, one more game to get here and it's actually those Bucs that I was talking about. Falcons at the Bucs. Atlanta -2.5. The total is 46.5. I think this game is really interesting. I don't even know if you expected me to kind of pick this game as one I wanted to talk about, but I think this game is really interesting for several reasons. The first is what we saw the Falcons do the last time these teams matched up, and then kind of maybe what we expect them to do this week. I feel like that's completely different just based on like implied game script and kind of where we are with this offense, right?
Yeah, I think you were chasing the box score for a couple weeks ago. That you'll probably be a little bit let down here. One, historically, like these second divisional matchups always tend to skew a little lower too. When these teams
Yeah.
have played each other, once already early season. These teams played less than a month ago too, and then just the game script that forced the Falcons to have 58 dropbacks in that game. Like we're just not going to have that type of game environment, especially with the Bucs on a short week. And then just the amount of injuries that the Buccaneers have had this week. And they've actually dipped they're actually underdogs in this game, given the loss of Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And we've seen this happen to a lot of quarterbacks. We've seen CJ Stroud splits without Nico Collins, and he still has the guys like Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. Patrick Mahomes, they lost Rashee Rice, Matthew Stafford with his guys this year, Puka and Kupp being out of the lineup. Like, we have to assume that this is a almost a devastating loss. Like, will it be crippling? Remains to be seen. But like losing these two players, like, is absolutely massive for this offense. Like, so much of the offense goes through Chris Godwin and Mike Evans that we're asking a lot for the gaggle of Trey Palmer, Sterling Shepard, and Jalen McMillan to step up and replicate like a half of that production. Like, so I mean, it is a big deal. Like it could be just really bad for this offense in general. And the defense is low key bad. Like it's been low key bad all year. So if it's a situation where the Falcons can get a lead, they could do things like they've done a couple weeks ago, where they can just get Bijan and Tyler Algier like in unison. They don't have to have Kirk Cousins drop back a lot, because they really don't want to have Kirk Cousins drop back a lot. Their pass rate over expectation was trending up, but we've seen like he has no mobility. Like they can't do anything. They can't run play action with him. They can't move anything around with him. So if they are able to run this game through their running backs, like this could be a big letdown game for fantasy points in general, for anyone trying to chase that box score from a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am with it as well. And to the receivers you mentioned, I mean, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess there at receiver. I kind of wrote in the waiver column that like I'm going to take an upside shot on McMillan. You had some really interesting stats about McMillan's slot usage in college that I'd like you to hit on here. But I'm really taking that, based on, kind of the usage we saw early in the season. It is a little bit concerning that he came back healthy and Sterling Shepard was still kind of playing ahead of them, although we did see that change a bit even before the Mike Evans injury on Monday night. Obviously, we saw Palmer come in after the Evans injury, which would suggest, that he might even be a little bit behind Sterling Shepard. But to your point, all of it is kind of just, a mess. And so I'm going to take a shot on Jalen McMillan. You can bring up the slot usage, which I think is interesting, because that role that Chris Godwin has been playing is been very lucrative, especially in PPR leagues. And whoever kind of ends up in that role, they're not going to be Chris Godwin, because, Chris Godwin is a very good receiver. But maybe if they can start, commanding some of those targets, maybe Sterling Shepard fits better in that role than McMillan. They've kind of played a similar number of their percentage of their routes in the slot anyway. But yeah, like this whole situation is such a mess. We actually have a question in the chat from Marcos. When Evans and Gobbins went down, or what do you think about Cade Otton this week? And I kind of think like, yeah, maybe that's the path we should be taking here in Tampa Bay, is, going after Cade Otton, who has been picked up over the last several weeks because he's kind of been useful. And he's kind of another one of those, as you mentioned, the back end of that tight end one group. He's kind of in there as well. And we might be getting a decent target share from him moving forward.
Yeah, I think short term, I do think for this individual game, I prefer playing it through Otton than think about like a DFS lens. I'm thinking about playing it through Otton more than trying to guess what's going to happen with the wide receivers, because from the wide receivers, it's Evans being out complicates it as well, because Evans is the X receiver in the offense. So it kind of shuffles the deck, because if it was just Godwin being out, it would be really easy to say like, oh, wow, this like opens up a nice spot for Jalen McMillan to just step up and be a slot receiver, because he did run a class high 91% of his routes from the slot in this draft class. 87% of his receptions were from the slot. So he is like the guy that would fit like the big slot role in this offense. It's been like great for Cooper Kupp. We see Drake London, in the Zach Robinson, where he comes from, how he's thriving playing big slot this year. But with Evans being out, it kind of reshuffles the deck, because you would think that they would then be forced to play like Trey Palmer at the X, and they probably won't play Shepard as, flanker. So like, does that make McMillan then have to step in that role? And then they play Shepard, into the slot by default. Shepard's been really bad when he's played in the slot this year. He's only averaging 0.45 yards per route run from the slot. McMillan's 1.34, so almost triple the success rate that he's had. But the Evans injury kind of complicates things and creates more guesswork that we have to do. And Evans, they already said, is probably not going to play until after the bye. So he's probably going to miss 3 games. So it could be kind of just a mess. I do think big picture, I'd want to bet on McMillan, because I think he was trending positively entering the year. He was a prospect I was interested in because he outperformed Rome Odunze just 2 years ago. And Rome Odunze was a top 10 pick. He was starting in week 1. He probably should have had 3 touchdowns in week 1 against the Commanders if you go back to that game, and didn't. Then he gets an injury and he kind of falls like behind a veteran player in an offense that's working. And then they don't reshuffle the deck. But now that they kind of have to, is he a guy I still want to bet on? He is. But I think short term, just for this week and for DFS, I think Otton is the play. He's had a target already and a career high rate of his routes run. And with Evans off the field, he has a 70 route sample. So it's not even just like the end of Monday night. And on those routes, he's been targeted 18.6% of the time. It goes up a little bit. Is he exciting? Is he flashy? Is he going to win you leagues? No. But can he be like a viable player at his price in DFS? And can he get you through like these lean weeks at tight end, especially if you've been playing guys that haven't been good to this point? I believe he can.
Yeah, I'm definitely in there as well. Like, I still think I'd rather, I don't know, maybe not this week. Like, I think probably Cade Otton over Hunter Henry this week, but like long term, probably Hunter Henry. But like that's kind of the bucket that we're talking about here. We didn't mention when we talked about the Miami offense. Are we buying this Jonnu Smith route participation and target share? Or are we thinking we're gonna lose that with Tua back? I'm interested in Jonnu Smith. I don't know what to do with him. At the beginning of that Bills game, before Tua left with injury, he was also getting a ton of targets, and so we didn't see it in week 1, but we kind of expected that kind of usage for Jonnu Smith. So just thinking about, that kind of back end tight end one, that's where I live. That's where I live, Rich. That's where I operate.
That's where everyone's lived this year until we got a couple guys back, like Ingram and Njoku coming back was pretty big. The ghost of Kyle Pitts has like been okay. Like he's in that bucket. Like he's been okay. Like you're just happy to be getting something,
touchdowns.
Right? Yeah, Mark Andrews we're doing things, man. We've never been so back this year.
Wide receiver 2, Evan Ingram, I believe is his official name. And then, hopefully, we're recording this for Thursday night. Hopefully we're getting TJ Hawkinson back. We'll see kind of where we go from here. Tampa Bay is the hive of uncertainty as we move forward for fantasy, because we haven't even mentioned the backfield yet, and kind of, what we saw from them last week in this first week with Rachaad White and with Bucky Irving and with Sean Tucker. Obviously Bucky Irving on the injury report on Wednesday, so maybe we're not going to have this 3-headed monster moving forward. Again, more uncertainty here in Tampa Bay. I do think it is notable that when we got down to brass tacks in that game on Monday night, they went back to Irving and White, and Tucker kind of fell out of the rotation. I think that is probably notable. It's probably something that means something moving forward. But ultimately, this is a tough situation to try to unravel.
Yeah, I think we've been there since Bucky Irving kind of turned this into a split. They are running a lot of plays with both of them on the field, which is pretty cool. You know, they're like usually it's kind of like a death nail. Usually when you hear like the two back system and two guys playing on the field at the same time, it doesn't really work. But they are having success with it. I think they want to do more of that, especially with all these injuries. It just depends if game script is going to allow them to do that. But I believe they want to run the offense through these guys while they can. It's just going to be a matter of can they hang around and do these and play competitive football. But it's going to be a frustrating situation. What's that?
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. The Harry Snowman and in the chat has blown my mind. There's a conversation going on in there about Cedric Tillman and, kind of what we expect. We talked about it earlier in the show about how Tillman got a lot of his targets from Dorian Thompson-Robinson. As it turns out, according to our sources, and I looked it up here, and it does say childhood friend Dorian Thompson-Robinson, that Cedric Tillman and Dorian Thompson-Robinson went like the high school together and played together in high school. I did not know that. How have we not heard every announcer say that? Or did I just miss it because I didn't have that game audio on? Remember how like every time anybody's played together ever,
the shower narrative.
Yeah, it's the shower narrative. Jay Cutler, was it Jay Cutler and Emmanuel Hall? Was that the most famous, hilarious?
No, it was wasn't it Johnny Knox?
Oh yeah, Johnny.
Was it Johnny Knox? Or no, it wasn't Johnny Knox. Who was it? Wait, it was someone else. It wasn't Johnny Knox.
I thought it was Emmanuel. I could be wrong. Whoever it was, that was always my favorite one. I did not know about the Tillman DTR. Thank you for blowing my mind, chat. I am now excited. It also occurs to me that I didn't ask you who your Uncut Gym was before the show. We were busy talking about how cheap my wife is, and she won't allow me to buy full-size candy bar for the local kids. So we should shame her and allow me to buy full-size candy bars. But who is your Uncut Gym for this week? Who's the guy that's maybe going under the radar, maybe not even on rosters that we are interested in?
There was a lot of options. I thought about maybe trying to force one of those guys that we talked about, but I'm actually going to go with Troy Franklin, who Matt called before the show the Thin Man. Definitely is a Bo Nix streamable week here. We've seen even Marcus Mariota get there last week against the Carolina Panthers. I do think that's going to be a squeaky wheel spot for Courtland Sutton, but we've seen Franklin get talked up by Sean Payton. So maybe that's actually a bad thing because he always talked up Marvin Mims, and Marvin Mims never did anything. But we've seen Troy Franklin's playing time go up 3 weeks in a row. He probably should have a touchdown in 3 straight games. He dropped the one. And it's just kind of a matchup based thing against this Carolina team that is 31st in yards allowed per target to outside receivers, the highest touchdown rate to outside wide receivers on the season so far. And from a prospect perspective, I mean, again, the shower narrative is in play too. Obviously, they didn't play in high school together, but in college together between Bo Nix and Troy Franklin. So maybe they have that rapport going for them. But as a prospect, he was an interesting prospect as well. He was 3rd in this draft class behind Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. in yards per route run. His yardage and production went up every year at Oregon. So maybe we're going to see a little surge here. Obviously, you're not going to bet on the Broncos wide receiver 2 big picture, but in a one game against the Carolina Panthers setting, if you're going to stream Bo Nix or make a Bo Nix stack this week, he's a cheap option. Oh, did we?
I'm muted. No. I muted myself. Oh. What a mistake. Earl Bennett. Earl Bennett is the Jay Cutler name. That's
Earl Bennett. Yes. Thank you.
Earl Bennett is the name, the Jay Cutler name. Sorry for all of you who have been yelling at your car or your headphones or wherever you're listening to this that we couldn't remember Earl Bennett. I apologize. I apologize indeed. What I'll say about Denver is I agree with you about Franklin, and what we saw, the usage from Franklin last week was positive. But the week before that, the usage was Devon Vele. And so I kind of wonder what are we going to do week to week? But I hope that it's Franklin because obviously there's some interesting upside there. You're going to love mine, Rich, my Uncut Gym this week. We didn't hit last week because the Carolina decided to just not play football, I guess. I'm not really sure what happened there. But mine this week, Jake Bobo. I'm in on Jake Bobo. It's Jake Bobo's season. I expect the Seahawks to be pushed to throw here. even if they get a little healthier on defense, we might get Reek Woolen back, and so we'll see what happens. I expect them to get pushed to throw in this game. They're already first in pass rate over expected. Maybe they pull that back a little bit without DK Metcalf, but I mean, we've already seen this be a pretty pass-heavy offense. I think we're going to see that continue. Obviously, if that does continue, you're most excited about Jackson Smith and Jigba. You're most excited about Tyler Lockett. We actually probably talk a little bit about Jackson Smith and Jigba and kind of your thoughts on him this week and moving forward. But since the start of the 2023 season, there have been 77 pass plays with Metcalf off the field and both JSN and Lockett on the field. So both of them playing on those 77 plays. Jake Bobo ran a route on 90.9% of those plays. He tied Lockett for the team lead with 16 targets in those situations. His 22.9 target rate per route was better than both Lockett's and JSN's in that sample. He has been targeted when Metcalf is out. Like, that is a thing that continues to happen. Obviously, I'm not saying like you should go and start him over like, useful good guys, but if you're in a deep league, you need a wide receiver 4. I think you could probably do worse than Jake Bobo this week.
Yeah, I think that's what happens on a lot of those plays is when they're actually calling plays like for Bobo, like that he actually has run. So like they're calling a specific play. But this is a situation that scares me. I think that removing DK Metcalf from this offense it could potentially be awful. It was last year when he missed the game. Geno Smith was the QB 18 that week when he missed. Because I don't see any explosive players in this offense outside of Kenneth Walker if DK Metcalf's down on the field. And that leads into what we're talking about with JSN. Like, we're now in the second coaching staff that's used Jackson Smith and Jigba the same exact way. And that it has to be somewhat concerning, right? This guy's not getting any targets downfield. He actually has a lower intermediate target rate than he did last year. There's just no explosion, no explosive plays out of him. Like, he's literally predicated on volume for fantasy football. And when you start to get guys in that same bucket, like, what's the difference between him and Wan'Dale Robinson? Like, for fantasy purposes? Like, what's the difference between him and Demario Douglas? Like, for fantasy purposes? Like, there really isn't. There really isn't. And like, this guy is consistently valued as a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 plus. You would hope that this is a spot to show us something different, because if DK Metcalf's out, like we assume, although it is DK Metcalf, he is a superhero. Like, if any dude's able to come back and play, it's this guy.
Yeah.
Who literally, like I said, is like a created player. But I mean, this would be a chance. No DK Metcalf, Ryan Grubb, you got your first. Like, show us something different, JSN. Like, actually show us something, because I think gamers are going to be like, oh, I'm going to play him in DFS. I'm going to be excited. But am I excited? Not particularly.
It's funny you mentioned DK Metcalf being a superhero. Every now and again, my sister will enter my office and I'll randomly take her down a YouTube rabbit hole. And one of those was DK Metcalf, him running down, was it Buda Baker? Him running down Buda Baker, and him being competitive in a 100-yard dash that featured like Olympians at his size, not even training. Just wild, absolutely wild. And then obviously the best DK Metcalf interview of all time, when someone asked him, could he bench the same amount as Aaron Donald? And then Aaron Donald tells him how much he benches. He goes, no, I cannot bench the same amount as Aaron Donald. Which, again, fun YouTube rabbit hole for everybody to go down. All right, that's it for us. We really appreciate you listening and supporting. Remember, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, Sharp Football Analysis on YouTube. Subscribe and like and rate and review wherever you find your podcast. We appreciate all of that. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can find all of Rich's work, his worksheet previews, previewing every single game every single week, and his DFS picks, which come out on Friday evening, Saturday morning, which have really been doing well this year. So make sure you check out all of that. Sharp Football Analysis. Use promo code ANGLES, 20% off, and we will be back to talk with you next week.